We are having this beautiful conversation at Mahindra Sanatkada Lucknow Festival 2025. And it is always a delight to be here, as I think many of us are pretty much in the sync with that thought. The book we are discussing here, which came out in August 2024, is a queer reading of Nawabi architecture and the colonial archive, Lucknow Queerscapes. A queer reading of Nawabi architecture and the colonial archives explores the architectural production of Nawabs Asifuddaula and Wajid Ali Shah and reveals the colonial bias against the queer expression. It offers methods of using queer strategies to read archival evidence against the grain and rewrite erased, overlooked, and suppressed histories. The book provides the readers a unique queer post-colonial architectural history of Lucknow from 1775 to 1857. It highlights the Nawab's non-normative expressions, which not only offered a fierce resistance to the colonial enterprise, but were also instrumental in furthering Lucknow as a cultural center. It simultaneously extracts parameters from queer studies and redefines them to illustrate ways in which queer architecture can be characterized. It reconstructs the footprints of Nawabi architecture erased by the colonial enterprise and places it back on the map, an exercise not undertaken meticulously until now. So it's a very interesting book, and I personally have been, I had the joy to have that copy already since December, and I have been reading parts, parcels again and again, going through different aspects of it, given the fact I'm from Lucknow and understanding several spaces and really looking at a non-spoken aspect of history and how interpretation of historical archives can lead to different aspects of it. So I'll try to also, I had a certain few points about it, and I think I would like to just to start and to set the stage, and also for the people who are here who want to know more. I think it'll be good to just know that what will be your origins, your personal association, and personally the connections to the subject particularly. So if that you can elaborate, please. Sonal, maybe.
Good afternoon. I'm Arul. It's great to be here.
Get the mic closer.
Yeah. The thing is that this idea of looking at Lucknow, and especially looking at Lucknow through a queer lens, it started in Ahmedabad when I was at CEPT University. So I'm basically from Chennai, currently based in Bangalore, and got a chance to do my master's in Ahmedabad, and Sonal was my tutor there. So this is a project that started in a design studio, an architectural design studio, where, I think it's quite appropriate that we're here at Qaiser Bagh, because I saw the image of Wajid, and the image where he's wearing the garment and there's a slit and you can see his chest. So I went to Sonal, and the idea was that we look at Lucknow through a particular lens. And I asked Sonal, can gender and sexuality be the lens through which one looks at Lucknow? And so I think that was the very initial origins of, mapping queer in Lucknow, and that's where it started. And I think the project took many twists and turns. That studio work was exhibited in Bangalore at Shrishti for an exhibition, and it's slowly a paper at the Society of Architectural and Historians Conference. So slowly, I think this work has sort of come about. It's taken a while, hasn't it?
Yeah, I think that was 2018, maybe 2018, 17. So it's been like almost 6 years. Lucknow has been at the heart of a lot of inquiry that we do at CEPT in the history studio, and Lucknow offers various lenses to reconstruct histories, because we are necessarily not interested in just celebrating what has been celebrated all the time, but finding something within that which has not been talked about. And Lucknow offers a lot of those instances. For example, the women who were there and the Nawabs. Of course, that history has been written several times, but we are necessarily interested in looking at the same history, saying that, all right, it made the colonial power very, very uncomfortable. And that is why that discomfort for the colonial power is something that we also qualify as queer, apart from the gender and sexuality of the Nawabs that were there. And that is what the book tries to take forward.
So I think this was also, in some ways, a passion project for the both of us. Your passion for Lucknow, my passion for queerness, and the idea that it was also a project that originated during the pandemic when we were both isolated, far from each other, but we could still connect online and we had time on our hands.
I think it was prior to that. You're forgetting. So, for some reason, like I had access to queer theory while I was studying, and when he started doing his thesis, he's like, "All right, I want to. I have two options. I will either we work on this one subject or we work on this subject, which is just collating the entire literature of queer theory." And I'm like, let's do that instead. So his architectural history master's thesis was just about collating all the literature evidence that he could lay on his hands on, and that actually also formed a lot of groundwork for actually bringing both of us into the discourse of what is queer studies, and gave us a more confidence about looking at things from that. We were able to internalize that lens to look at history and historical artifacts.
Just out of purely like curiosity, and since we are talking about a queer reading, how did we arrive at the word queer, first of all, given the subject and the context? And is there an interpretation you would particularly like to talk about, that how do you interpret this word in a particular way in your text and research, please?
So the word queer we use in a variety of ways, actually, and I think the way author Sara Ahmed uses queer, she says that queer is a very slippery term, and it is in that it has its power. So queer here represents, of course, the it's an umbrella term that we use for the LGBTQIA plus community, and so that is one aspect of queer. But then there are so many different aspects, and one of the ways in which we use it in the book is to talk about the non-normative, that separates itself from the normative, that is against, in some cases, the establishment or the institution. So that is also a definition that is very close to the book. And Sonal, you can maybe come in here in terms of the words we found in the colonial archive that drew us to the word queer as well.
Yes. I want to, before coming to that, I want to point to the fact that the time period that we are looking at, the Nawabi, especially Asif and Wajid, it's not a very long time period, 1790s to 1850s, but at the time, the term queer did not exist the way it exists now, and we are very conscious of that. And hence, the way we define queer is also that which makes the power uncomfortable. We do rely on the contemporary, language and the knowledge related to queer study, the definition of the term. But we are also very conscious that maybe at the time, Asif and Wajid did not identify themselves as queer. So with that thing, coming to what Paul was saying, actually the project began, and this is to answer your first question also, the origins of the project. While we were constructing the history of Lucknow, we just started looking, see, how do we access histories? Through the archives. And most of the archives that are available to us, whether we like it or not, which are accessible, are the colonial archives. And we started reading it, and we just came across a lot of, very frequently, these words like debased, vulgar, what are the very unsightly, portly, mean, so many words, outrageous, uta, vulgar and so on, bastard, just like immense, and the immensity and the frequency of it was just not stopping. And and that is where we're like, all right, there is a reason why they are saying that. But through the project and as the project grew and evolved, we started to reclaim those terms. And Sarah Ahmed's work definitely helps us, reclaim those terms and then revalidate or requalify the same thing in what is the power of it being queer or strange and vulgar and so on. What does it do? So we were interested in that.
I think yeah, it's extremely wonderful and interesting to read through the text, which actually the lens is very specific and it's very boldly, cited and backed up by these archival records and as you bring it out clearly. And but there's also another part of the book which I found extremely interesting, and I want to talk about it before we move on to more philosophical or that kind of approach. I I read a lot about the origins of Lucknow in here, especially Machi Bhavan and Daulat Khana, particularly those areas. Can you throw some light on it? Because I think it's extremely interesting because we as Lucknowites often talk about these origins of Lucknow, and there's a lot of missing literature, but I'm sure I think it must have been an effort and something, a gap which you had to address. I have a feeling it felt like that in the book. So please, if you can talk about that.
Okay, so we were getting a lot of incoherent information related to what was the extent of Machi Bhavan. And some people said it is what it is now, what is understood. Some people thought that Daulat Khana was part of the Machi Bhavan. Some people said Daulat Khana was somewhere else. And it was a very confusing, this thing. At some point, Daulat Khana also means the place where the Nawab lives. So it can be attributed to a generic thing. But what in our book we are also saying is that Daulat Khana was a generic term, but it was also a place. And that is the place where right now Asifi Koti is there, and the place behind the tank and the gallery, picture gallery, all those areas were part of the Asif's big palace. And that was integrated with the Machi Bhavan area, which is actually part of the Imambara, and now where the KGMC thing is. That they were all interconnected, they were all part of the one unit. And in the book, we provide a very detailed footprint, vulgar and so on, bastard, just like immense, and the immensity and the frequency of it was just not stopping. And that is where we're like, all right, there is a reason why they are saying that. But through the project and as the project grew and evolved, we started to reclaim those terms. And Sarah Ahmed's work definitely helps us, reclaim those terms and then revalidate or requalify the same thing in what is the power of it being queer or strange and vulgar and so on. What does it do? So we were interested in that.
I think yeah, it's extremely wonderful and interesting to read through the text, which actually the lens is very specific and it's very boldly, cited and backed up by these archival records and as you bring it out clearly. And but there's also another part of the book which I found extremely interesting, and I want to talk about it before we move on to more philosophical or that kind of approach. I read a lot about the origins of Lucknow in here, especially Machi Bhavan and Daulat Khana, particularly those areas. Can you throw some light on it? Because I think it's extremely interesting because we as Lucknowites often talk about these origins of Lucknow, and there's a lot of missing literature, but I'm sure I think it must have been an effort and something, a gap which you had to address. I have a feeling it felt like that in the book. So please, if you can talk about that.
Okay, so we were getting a lot of incoherent information related to what was the extent of Machi Bhavan. And some people said it is what it is now, what is understood. Some people thought that Daulat Khana was part of the Machi Bhavan. Some people said Daulat Khana was somewhere else. And it was a very confusing this thing. At some point, Daulat Khana also means the place where the Nawab lives. So it can be attributed to a generic thing. But what in our book we are also saying is that Daulat Khana was a generic term, but it was also a place. And that is the place where right now Asifi Koti is there, and you know the place behind the tank and the gallery, picture gallery. All those areas were part of the Asif's big palace, and that was integrated with the Machi Bhavan area, which is actually part of the Imambara, and now where the KGMC thing is. That they were all interconnected. They were all part of the one unit. And in the book, we provide a very detailed footprint by rereading all these archival information and creating a footprint very meticulously and carefully to say that this was, in our understanding, the entire extent of Machi Bhavan. We have actually been able to identify almost like 58, 59 structures in the entire complex. And there are a lot of buildings like Sangi Dalan and the Hammam and other Bauli Palace that were very contested. Like some authors wrote that it was here, some authors wrote it's far away, and so on. But after reading a lot of images together, putting together maps, we also accessed some Persian literature and we got it translated. Reading all that, listening to a lot of memoirs and things, we have been confidently able to now locate at least 58 buildings in Machi Bhavan, which actually do not have presence in the local public memory. So please lay your hands on the book if you want to read about the history of Machi Bhavan. And similarly, even for Qaiser Bagh, we have like been able to identify a lot. But yeah.
So with the Machi Bhavan, I think a lot is known about, for example, the history before the Nawabs, the Sheikhzadas being, part of that being part of their complex, and how when Asif moves his capital to Lucknow, that becomes his home. And how he builds over there is something that we write a lot about in the book. A lot of literature has helped us, the Colonial Archive as well. Joseph Tiefenthaler, who visited during Asif's father's reign, has provided plans of the area. So we know what it looked like before Nawab Asif came to Lucknow. And then we were able to look at imagery by the Daniels, for example, the wonderful Yale panorama that shows the entire, one side of the Gomti, to have some idea of in what order these buildings came up. And what was wonderful about the way Asif built was the fact that, it would have been very easy for him to sort of start in a fresh site and build anew his vision, his dream. But he incorporated what was there. And that is what we found very fascinating, the hybrid of taking what is already there and introducing something new, and how it talks to each other is something that we do write about quite a bit in the book.
Yeah. Just to build on that, one example which we all know, the Bauli. Like I think all of you have been to the Bauli. So in Tiefenthaler's imagery, which is also in the book, it is 1725 imagery, I think, quite early. And you can see that the Bauli was not accessible from the Imambara side because Imambara did not exist. It was accessed from the other side, from the north side. And right now it's accessed from the west, right now, from the west side. So it was at the time accessed from the north side. Putting together, as Paul said, a lot of imagery, we realized that Bauli was the connector. For Asif, he used the Bauli to connect everything that was the Machi Bhavan complex and the new Imambara complex that he created. So it was like a wedge. Yeah. It was like a wedge because also there was it was a wedge not in just of spatiality but also in terms of the volume. Because in Imambara, it goes down, like the entry is from down below, and from this side it is like higher up. So that wedge was like, you could traverse from within these areas, Imambara being very public and the Machi Bhavan being very private. So Bauli became that connector and also like, the wedge. Very interesting section. And so we have built on that Met Museum wala the sketch, which is an incomplete sketch. It's not a complete sketch of Imambara. So that incomplete sketch helped us understand this connector logic. So.
I think that's why I wanted to hear all this, what we just heard, because we have often talked here in Lucknow about the origins. Where did Machi Bhavan go? What was the connecting factor? And how did it come to be? What changed over time? I think this is a great, fantastic understanding. So thanks for that. Why the focus on Wajid, if I can ask? Because this is the book has a of course, there's Asaf, and as you talk about as well, but there is a very clear focus on Wajid. Can we have?
It started with Wajid.
No, that's true. It did start. The idea started with Wajid because Wajid is everywhere. He's the most popular face of Lucknow. So Asif and Wajid, yes, actually we had three Nawabs that we were talking about. We were talking about Asifadullah, Nasiruddin Haidar Shah, and Wajid Ali Shah, and we ended up a little over our word limit, around
Over 50,000 words.
so we had to cut. So it may be possible to have something coming out on Nasir sometime soon. Yes. So we selected these Nawabs because of their their non-normative expressions of gender and sexuality. Asif, very clearly a non-normative sexuality, and with Wajid, what is very interesting to me is two things. One is in terms of expression of gender. Of course, not to say that Wajid did not think of himself as a man, but in the colonial eyes, and we were looking at this through the lens of the colonial archive, the idea of effeminacy is something that kept coming up. Not just talking about the Nawab, Wajid, not just talking about other Nawabs, talking about the entire citizenry of Lucknow, and the way that Wajid was fluid and didn't allow himself to be restricted by what would be seen as a certain gender role is something we found very interesting. And what was also interesting is the non-normative or the queer especially talking about power. The way that Wajid expressed himself, expressed his politics, was very non-normative in our eyes.
Yeah, I think he's already talked about effeminacy, but Vajid, like in the archives, we do find like there are two ways we can answer this question. We do find instances in which Vajid is very much aware and also like he desires, he also celebrates the attention of the same gender. And also, so he is like, not necessarily normative in his practice of sexuality. He was also like, he married 370 times, like, or maybe more. But, what was at the heart of the project was what we define and we call institutionalized ishq. The term ishq, it comes from his writing. So we refer to two books. One was the Hindi translation called Parikhana. It's like a very small book that you find on Amazon. And then we also found a Persian text which is called Ishaqnama. Now there are a lot of contestations who say Parikhana came first or Ishaqnama came first. But in our understanding, whatever we've understood is that he wrote Parikhana first and he commissioned Ishaqnama later. And Ishaqnama became like a more elaborate version with, it had 103 paintings of Wajid's life. And the two books are just talking about his interpersonal relationships with the women, with his subordinates, with his friends, and with the British, compatriots at the time. Which means that, and he calls it Ishaqnama. So we are reading that for him, the personal and the political always overlapped. And to institutionalize it, he had to center himself. And everybody had to be around him in relation to him. It was a very transactional relation. It was not a hierarchical one. And for us, that is very queer. Because, and that is something that the colonial power did not understand. Like, what is this which is non-hierarchical? And the way the control and the power gets exhibited is in a transactional relation in which Wajid puts himself within the people. And if you read the language, like I can't read Persian so well, but in the Hindi you can see Parikhana, you can see that he's like, he says, "Oh, I am like very hurt that that person, she was disloyal to me," and so. So in the hurt is where the control happens, and everywhere you can see that. So this way he operated his ishq was something that was very, very powerful, and that is for us was the center point, and this is also how we are describing queer in today's context as well. And in that sense, I would also take the opportunity to say we are expanding the idea of queer.
Okay, yeah, that's quite interesting to understand. And also, just to also let you know, it's been 2 years I've been requesting Sanatkada people to keep their theme of the festival as Wajid Ali Shah. So maybe this could be a cue if any of you are here. So next year, a little Wajid with a connection with Calcutta and henceforth could be so interesting. I've been saying it a couple of years already. But it's beautiful. I think it's very interesting to read through all that, and also that particular Ishaknama, particularly how you talk about it, Parikhana, where people think this one of the building adjacent to us is Parikhana. So it is still named as Parikhana. There's a board about it, but there's a lot of misnomer and misunderstanding about that historical aspect and what building exists, what changed, even architecturally. So it was very refreshing to see the architects coming together to talk about it. There is also a lot of intangible cultural heritage reference of Lucknow, which we talk about, particularly like, for example, this Basant Meena Bazaar Mela in Qaiser Bagh. So what do you think? Are we doing this? That's what we are doing right now? Or can you throw some light about that?
I think so, very much. Like now, when you put the question like that, it seems like it is what it is. One thing that I would like to highlight is if you go in the Baradri here, there is that painting hanging by one of the jewelry shops. And I'm sure everybody has seen that painting. And if you have not, please take a look at it. It's a painting of the Qaiser Bagh. And historians before us have written that that's a painting of Qaiser Bagh for one of the Jogi Melas. But we, after reading Parikhana and Ishaknama, we are like quite confident that it was part of the Meena Bazaar Mela. And so the story goes that the women, the Paris, who were actually the trainees in his dance school, the Kathak school, they've once requested that we want to have a Meena Bazaar. So please, organize a Meena Bazaar for us. Now, Meena Bazaar means that, you have to be dressed in finery and the shops have to be organized by women, the buyers will be women, sellers will be women, or in the service of women, and so on. So he organizes that, and he also commissions, like he says that the women during the Meena Bazaar were dressed in zarbakt and all those, so like very brocade kind of attire he gets for them. And this Qaiser Bagh, this entire thing around it, was an extension to the palace. It was never a palace. It was the garden, and 365 days, 24/7, it was a theater for continuous dance, drama, theatricity. So Meena Bazaar was held within that. And if you look at the painting, we describe it in the book with great detail. But the painting says it all. There are like, sweetmeat sellers, there are like kebab sellers, there are like dancers performing, there are music happening. And it's all happening together. And now what we witness here is precisely, we can also hear the trucks and the horns and like Bollywood music and all that. So I think like today, Qaiser Bagh is also able to still embody that vitality and multivalence of the time. So yes, like.
There's also something which was interesting about red and ochre in Meena Bazaar. Like people were asked to wear red and ochre as a color code to celebrate and come together. So that's something I was reading about, and I think I don't know if Madhvi is here, but Madhvi will be so ecstatic about the fact that Sanatkada relates to a historical Meena Bazaar. This is pretty much the idea of it to be together. But drawing from that, since we are drawing into those historical things which we are still continuing as Lucknow people, because, I mean, I'm having a conversation with you pretty much as a citizen here. So, is there any other parallels you can draw from your text, what you found in archives, and you have known and understood Lucknow as of now? What are the other contemporary parallels which can be drawn from the text, which can kind of make us relate more to that particular anecdote or an archive, please?
So, wonderful question. Lucknow has so many layers, and the Nawabi layer is what, around 80 years maybe in Lucknow from when Asif made it its capital in 1775 to 1856. So it's a short period of time, but the Nawabs really put their stamp on the city. And then, of course, we have a colonial layer, which is so much of erasure that takes place at that point of time. And the fact that the city is still able to connect to the Nawabi roots, and this erasure was massive, as in around the Machi Bhavan, entire localities were completely erased. At Qaiser Bagh, having these roads cut across the complex, which was the roads were always outside the complex. So this entire space getting, sort of split apart. But what was very interesting is, we had a queer map of Lucknow at the very beginning. This was when, I was in Ahmedabad. And it was so interesting to see the overlap between, queer spaces, for example, Pride March routes, and the historic sites of Lucknow, and even places that have been destroyed, but yet the memory continues in some way or another. So we were able to see those parallels. And of course, we were also able to draw parallels between colonial erasures and, the kind of, institutionalized violence, for example, against queer communities here in Lucknow. So these things sort of go hand in hand.
Yeah, I think also, like, if we want to extend the argument beyond the book, because we are not necessarily making a case so much for the present day, except for the memory of it and the presence and the capacity of the city to incorporate more people and inclusivity. But I think beyond that, the city has always been witness to several political regimes, always one coming and trying to place their identity on the city all the way until the present times. And the city's capacity to integrate that, and yet each of those political identities remain, visible and alone, is something that, I just see the city's capacity to be able to absorb all of that. And in that lies its strength of being an inclusive city. Like, it just embraces everybody. So I think that is something that we draw parallel from the historical times.
Yeah, thank you. That's wonderful because even we tried as part of this festival itself to I think in 2021 we tried to recreate by animation this Qaiser Bagh complex, and we found that before 1857 Safed Baradari had 4 domes, which is this octagonal end, what we think was flat always, had domes above it, and that is not there anymore. So there's a lot of memory erasure which happened at that point of time, and which we did not really document or we did not talk about it. So that comes out very beautifully indeed. And also in the same way, in the same, I think, direction, we see your book goes from various tangents. I mean, takes various tangents, and this could be social aspect, it could be gender aspect, it could be cultural aspect, and at times religious aspect as well. How were you able to balance those tangents? What were the challenges you found? Because it's quite interesting how you are able to go from one to another, but I'm sure it must have been a process. So as a researcher particularly, I want to know about that process from your end, please. How did the table of content come to be?
Yes, table of content is it was a very interesting exercise. Um, we are actually saying that our book is a methods book, and in the process of writing a methods book, it does, like, it is primary audience is academic, definitely, but in the process we also have written the history, rewritten the history. So if somebody wants to pick the book up and say, all right, I want to use it like 2 chapters, I want to use it as a travelogue of Lucknow, they can do it. If somebody wants to pick up the book and say, all right, I want to know everything that was square in Machi Bhavan, they can do it. If somebody wants to pick up the book and say that I want to identify 10 qualifiers of what makes Lucknow queer architecture, what are the qualifiers, they can do that. But that was for us the byproduct. We were interested in the methods, and in the methods then we were very, very conscious that we do not qualify one gender over the other or one religion over the other and so on. And while we were writing the book, we were writing together. It meant that, we are and a lot of writing happened with a lot of reading, because the book is about queer reading. So we are reading it together and we are brainstorming together. See, I read it this way, and then Paul would say, yeah, I think, but you know what, this may mean this thing. And similarly, if Paul is reading something, then I would respond to that. And once we brainstorm and, articulate it for us, by talking it out, then only it would come to the paper, and that conversation helped us in, restraining our arguments and not, like, superimposing any opinions. So we were very conscious of this book not being an opinionated one, but a very argumentative one. And that's how we were able to, like, as you said, like, balance out these things.
Yes, and the idea of queer architecture, because very little has actually been written about, especially queer architecture in the context of India, for example. So taking a city, and we had all this understanding, Sonal, even before I did, of what queer studies are, what queer theory is. But we were very conscious as to not take something and sort of try to fit Lucknow into that mold. So we had to be very conscious when we were reading about the structures, when we were reading about the people, that our qualifiers come from the site and not necessarily something that is imposed from outside. So our book does not necessarily aim to define a queer architecture, for example. It's more describing what we see in Lucknow, and then talking about what is characteristic about the architecture of Lucknow. And we hope that people can take this work forward and can look at other cities as well and use this not necessarily to define, but to understand. And I think that's what Sonal also means by we use it as a methods. Think of it as a methods book rather than a book that defines.
I agree, because there's a lot of, you can feel the discussion in the book, the way, because it presents ideas, it gives you, it kind of gives you a kind of a right to interpret as well. So I think it's a very interesting way of writing also, and I think it must have been a challenge as well to present things just in different opinions and everything, and still together. So I think that I'm really wanted to point that out. In among because you try to also bring out about that, how you say that contemporary society here particularly, and there is institutionalized aggressiveness against queerness, or as you put it. Why would you say that? What made you feel like that, and what could be? You can say that I don't want to answer that, but we would like to hear a little bit as well, because the book is very revolutionary in that sense. There is no queer readings of architecture in India so far, like whether it be any part of or region or background or social system. So it's that's why I'm hoping that there's a lot of people who are audience for that here, particular aspects. So why do you think that? What do you think about the British? How can you compare that era to this era? Is there any parallels you draw as a researcher?
Well, that comment of mine was more from previous work that we had done, the studio project. And I visited Lucknow for the first time in 2018. And this was before the Supreme Court judgment. And, not to say that, the judgment has changed everything. Legally, things have changed, but societally, as a society, it takes time for these changes to come into effect. And when I was going through, newspaper articles, you type in, queer or LGBTQIA, and ask about Lucknow, and so much used to come, and so much of it was, violence against the queer. So that is something that is imprinted, at least in my mind, and how institutions then held that value. And hopefully now that the laws have changed, maybe society will also change. And I can see that there is a change. I can feel that there is a change, and let's hope it's fast enough.
Yeah, I mean, that's just like the reminder that we had, basically, it was Paul's work. We had put a map, which was the queer map, in which was, there were several layers. So one was the layers of the queer identity, and in that he mapped these architectural artifacts that were commissioned by the Nawabs, superimposed by sites of oppression, which were spatializing from the newspaper articles where were violence inflicted by policemen on, say, queer bodies, stuff like that. Then there were these sites of, like, what was the term? I don't remember, but like identifying Humsafar Trust and, communities that come together and, like, help for the queer inclusion and also advocacy, advocacy communities and so on. So that was one map, one layer, and there were several other layers in which we were trying to actually look at what is the present day thing, and also mapping the Pride March, all of that, what sites does it cover, and so on, and layering it with the past. So that happened in 2018, and I think that is where the genesis lay of this project. And I think it does continue. There are always, these things will always continue. But as Paul said, we do hope that it's like for the better, like, there's more inclusivity, and there's definitely more dialogue now, as we can see.
I think Mahindra Sanatkada Festival particularly prides itself in creating a space for a very open dialogue. So the festival has incubated time and again, ideas which did not always fit in, which very much is the idea that things not fitting in, and you bringing it out through a book as well. I think I'm very, very happy about this publication particularly. As also, I think they will be interesting if we have some questions from the audience. But before I do, what are the takeaways you think the readers there are for the readers? Like what readers can take away from your book? What are the things you as authors want them to read? Like just say like page 57, read this paragraph.
I'm not going to give you a page number. But one thing that we really want to bring out through the book, just going back to my association with what we can call queer architecture and that master's thesis that Sonal was talking about, while looking at how queer architecture is written about, one thing that struck me is that it's always about appropriation. It's always about fighting against the system, claiming something, right? So that's what becomes queer. And what was very interesting to see in Lucknow is that, the Nawabs had the agency. Yes, there was, so much of colonial oppression simultaneously, but they had the agency to be able to craft. And we really see architecture as, a reflection of their personality. For example, I remember, Asif's poetry. And unfortunately, I couldn't read it myself. So Sonal read out certain passages to me. And I really felt like I got to know Asif through that poetry, the kind of isolation that he writes about, inner struggles, inner turmoils, relationships with other people. He's writing about, a lover, for example, and how all of that in some ways is reflected in a structure that unfortunately we don't know where it exactly is, which is the Aina Khana. So we know that it is connected to the palace complex, but there's no footprint of that structure. And the colonial archive writes so much about it, a muddled confusion of oddities, how did these objects come together. But to just read about that structure and to imagine it, because we didn't necessarily have a footprint, and then to see how it reflected Wajid as a person, I think that is something that we'd really like, an architectural audience, for example, to be able to take away from this book.
I'll build on that. So that is an excellent example that you pointed out. If anybody from you audience know where Aina Khana was located, please come and tell us, because we really want to know. We've not been able to locate it. That's one thing that we really lament, that we've not been able to place where Aina Khana was. We do think it was within the Machi Parvan complex. Now, when Asif builds the Aina Khana, he surrounds himself with a lot of mirrors, like everywhere, big mirrors, small mirrors. They're kept against the wall. They are hung on the wall. They're hanging from the ceiling. They're all kinds of mirrors. Now, what the colonizers, colonial writers write is that it's a mishmash. There is no proper way of curating things in that Aina Khana. And they also write about Asif as if he's a very fat person who doesn't know how to sit, who doesn't have any grace, who doesn't have any masculinity. That is how they write. So we are arguing in the Aina Khana what he does, and this is the agency of the queer. It's not about fighting and confronting, because that's not a queer way of fighting. What he does is he invites people to the Aina Khana, European visitors, and he makes them see his image, the body, his image, reflected multiple times in that palace. And he's like, this is what I am, you see it. And it made the Europeans so uncomfortable. And that discomfort is what they write about. They're like, we don't want to see what are these mirrors and why is the body getting, reflected so many times. And that discomfort is something that we are reading in the archives, which we call the queer reading. So one can read it and say, yeah, it was a bad building. It had like all these mirrors. But we read it the other way and say, that was the agency of a queer body to not contest it, like, by fighting it out, but by just doing these, gestures which were like very disobedient and which were very discomforting. And that is which we think of very fun, like, without having to fight it out, you are still able to do that. And I think that is the takeaway from the book. The strategies, these little things that people think are stupid, but they are fun. But in that sense, they are subverting the power by actually just doing what they have to do. There are other stories also, like the shoes story. Like the Wajid refused to be, he had to wear black shoes. Now we don't know if he could wear those or not. But he at some point told his painters to just paint him from the top, from until this point, so that the shoes are never seen. Now, this is his way of exerting his agency, that he can still, present himself the way he wants to present without him being presented as subservient to the colonial power. So these fun strategies were something that we were constantly looking in the archives. And I think they are very applicable to people, like not in the sense that you do the same thing, but seeing value in something that is like, not following the norm. And that's, I think, the biggest takeaway from the book. Because we're following the method, we are writing the method, we are identifying those instances, then we are re-describing those things and so on. So it's a re-emphasizing on the same thing.
I think another thing that really stands out about Wajid that we write about in the book as well is, the role of the Khwaja Sara, for example, at the court of Lucknow. And, how we see one example of him, the colonel, Haji Sharif, who he appoints as the head of his small little army. So you have a person of, non-normative identity who's then leading these men. So And, the British are very uncomfortable by this. And, he actually gets a directive, and we see Sleeman writing about this, saying, your court has eunuchs, your court has fiddlers, you have to remove them. Wajid says yes. But he's not able to. Wajid is not able to imagine a court of Lucknow without the Khwaja who are in positions of power, without the music, without the dance. That is his form of the political. So he's just not able to do this. And then, that is used as one of the excuses to annex Awadh, saying, he promised us something and he's not going about it. And for the colonial audience, for the colonial power, it is that, he's not a man of his words. But for us, the way we read it is that he is just not able to imagine, their idea of what, government should be. And these people become very important to him.
Little acts of rebel has, and the own kind of rebel has actually, just to also let you know, that it continued, because when Simon Commission came here and they were having probably tea party here and they barricaded every part of Qaiser Bagh so no protests can happen, people of Lucknow flew black kites and then they cut the kites so the kites come down here, which said Simon go back. So these are from the archival letters. So I think this is Lucknow in a way, a city of resistance, a city of voices, a city of diversity, and there's a plurality to its sense, and it is brought out very beautifully. I think I would like to give the mic to the audience. If anybody has any questions, I would be very happy to, and if the volunteers can help facilitate that, that'll be great. Otherwise, I can come as well. And just to, before people think about more questions, also see the copies of this book is available there at the Sanatkada Festival entrance. There's a bookshop. You can get it. The authors got a Graham grant for taking up this research project. So the copies were published primarily for UK, which was around 13,000 rupees per copy. They have fought very hard to, first of all, bring out an Indian version for us, which is like, I think, much cheaper.
under 1,000.
Yeah,
So it's we were really interested that we are we're talking about the situatedness of this work, and so we are very much invested that the audience here reads it. So it's available at a special price at the Sanatkada bookshops, please.
And I think I'll request the authors to remain a bit available if they can sign the copies if it's requested. Definitely, please. So, any questions, please? Yes.
No, actually, I wanted to also ask, as an architect, probably that's my question, that the first thing that during this conversation, I could hear a lot of intangibles from the perspective of queer agency that went into creating an architecture that we see here in this city. Does the book also list some tangible things like Aina Khana you came towards in the end, which was a very tangible example of how this impacted the architecture. So did you spot other such examples? Some things that you could say were very queer in the, articulation or, So of course the lens is there that we understand, and we are trying. We would try and look into it, but definitely in terms of the research that you went into, you might have spotted similar examples. So something else that you could,
The next example that comes to my mind is the Mermaid Gate, which would have been right, beyond the gateway over there, and also
the Lanka. So actually, I'll give a long answer. So the book is divided into two sections. The first section is argumentative. How we have been discussing and all that. We argumentate in the first part and we lay out our premise. that this is how we are reading and this is how we will be describing. The second part, which is actually a longer part, is called the Lucknow Queerscapes. And in that, the book is, again, that section is divided into two parts, Machi Bhavan and Qaiser Bagh. So we look at each and every building. So Mermaid Gate, these Lucky Gates, the Lanka, which does not exist anymore, several pavilions that were there, the Falak Sair, and then the Baradaris, Chandiwali Baradari, and in Machi Bhavan we are talking about the Sangi Dalan, several courtyards, the Sangi Dalan courtyards and things like that. We also call Qaiser Bagh, the periphery, the central quadrangle, also a very tangible example of queer architecture. So we were very conscious right from the beginning that we are writing about architecture. It's very tangible. So the examples in the Lucknow Queerscapes are all architectural examples. And it's also like we are also looking at pavilions and how they were dressed up and dressed down. We also talk about some of the temporary structures that were there on the river and so on. So there are many examples, many tangible examples. We invite you to read the book, and sometimes we just get carried away by talking about the argumentation. But yes, it's all leading to the architectural examples.
Thank you so much. I think we would delve into it further through the book. Yeah, thank you.
There is one at the back.
So I'd like to take it forward from the previous question, and I think maybe I'm interpreting her question anyway. So one part is the tangible example of architecture, which seems to me is essentially an opinion about what a queer architecture could be, right? It's not necessarily an argument. So I'm just curious, because what your talk is very fascinating. I'm curious as to, were there any more tangible examples of the inputs which, for instance, Nawab Asafuddollah they gave, which any document of the sort which can further strengthen the argument this were indeed the idea behind it, or anybody's architect, etc. So that's what I meant by tangible examples of which corroborate the interpretation.
If I am getting your question correctly, say for example the Imambara. We are talking about Imambara also. Now, one thing that has to be, we are very conscious of, we are not calling it Imambara is queer, but we are saying it's a queer reading of Imambara. Our title always says queer reading of the Nawabi architecture. So when in a queer reading, for us, Imambara starts to appear very multivalent because it was a religious entity. It was the Imambara, but it was very celebratory. It was very austere. There was the grave also of Asafuddollah, but there was a celebration and a riot of colors and the poetry being sung, and sometimes there were also instances of women coming there and protesting against the power. So it started to become very multivalent. And for us, that is very important. Somebody actually in the archives, they gave an example that it's a manufactory, which means that it is where it's an industrial thing. And they said that there are several funnels or the chandeliers that are actually not hung from the ceiling but kept on the floor. And they are just kept like that. So in the kept like that is what we think is the beauty of the place. And that is our queer reading of the Imambara. And it's in the archives. Like even, sometimes Asif writes about it. Sometimes Wajid is himself writing about these things. So in our queer reading of Qaiser Bagh, we are actually relying a lot on what Wajid was writing. And through that, we are qualifying what is, beautiful about it.
Very true. And I think this very structure over here, the Safed Baradari, that was originally, conceptualized as a religious building. It was an imambara, constructed to be an imambara. And then when we see that Meena Bazaar painting, and we see the women on top and them looking down and, using it as an as a place to see what is happening in the Qaiser Bagh complex, we see this idea of multivalence again. We see extreme ideas of theatricity with the Lanka that is right there, right? The library. So, the library sort of sits on one half of what would have been the Lanka pavilion, and how, Wajid uses that as a stage. And then, the entire Bagh over here becomes, the audience to see what is happening on the stage. And in some cases, the entire Bagh is the stage, and Wajid is sitting there and as the audience and seeing what is happening. So we find these elements of multivalence, of theatricity, of plurality in these very structures that we see around us.
Yeah. Will there be any more questions, please?
Hi, thank you so much for this talk. Really curious about the book, particularly from the perspective of somebody who teaches in women's and gender studies and is not very familiar with architecture as a discipline, but does know about Sarah Ahmed. So I was curious about whether you have any comments about the sort of pedagogical value of this book, if you've thought about how it could be used in the classroom, whether you've taught with it or how you might envision teaching with it. Yeah, thanks.
Um, uh, as we said, it is primarily a methods book. So definitely it is for us also, I think it has a very high pedagogical value because seeing the examples and trying to understand Lucknow history from it is like a byproduct. It's definitely there, and we've written it with a lot of care. But yes, it's a pedagogical tool. So as like, say for example, Sarah Emma talks about orientations and disorientations, and what alignments, how do people start aligning themselves in socially speaking, or class wise and so on. Now we start to also extract that, and because it's very geographical, it's very spatial, it helps to helps us to start reading the buildings in that way. What we have also done, which we did not speak about, is that while describing these places, we actually write about it as if it's an embodied exploration of the two sites, following Sarah Ahmed's idea of orientation and disorienting. So we use our body uh, and the situatedness of the body, whether it's a queer body or whether it's not a queer body, and so on. And so, how does it align itself, and how does it, disorient and starts reorienting itself? So some things get missed out and some things start to become prominent, and we are constantly familiarizing and unfamiliarizing ourselves. So as a methodology, we are also it's embedded in that. We are not taking a planimetric bird's eye view. It's at eye level. It's always also orienting. It's like a sequential description, and then we superimpose it with the reading.
Taking off from your question and what Nishant had also said, that it's a very sort of intersectional kind of understanding where we are looking at gender, we are looking at sexuality, we are looking at various other things. So, just an example that you gave, Sonal, of the Imambara being used as a site of protest. So, the women come there and are using it as a site of protest. But what are they protesting against? They are protesting against Khwaja Sara, who's sitting in Faizabad and is being unfair to them. So, at every point of time, we see conflicts. And, we notice this throughout the book, how Wajid, for example, uses jealousy, to control. And these are not necessarily nice things. So I think we're being very true to the material, showing, multiple sides or multiple facets of the same coin.
Yeah, we don't want to necessarily proselytize any of the things that Vajit did. Like, we're not like supporting any of that. It's just we stating it matter of fact. This is what it was.
So any other question, please?
So I'm sorry, I'm not really familiar with like what a methods book would be. So that's what I'm trying to assess here. So you said like it's maybe a method to assess the like how to do the queer reading into the architecture that we see around us. If I'm getting it right. So I want to ask like a lot of Persian architecture and Islamic architecture tries to depict like Jannat and like very beautiful ornate like these structures. So, what differentiates Lucknow architecture, or how does the queer reading enter into that space? Because, just
Okay,
wanted
it's
to
a
ask.
nice question. It's a very nice question. I love those kind of questions. So when you say methods, I'll just like simplify it. So methods is like, there is a way of seeing, and that way is defined already. And so in the way and that's what we are saying, we're drawing upon queer theory or Sarah Emmert. So there are certain positions that they qualify, that for example, Sarah Emmert would say ki, I'm interested in orientations, but I'm also actually interested in deviances and disorientations, because that is where queer lies. The capacity of an individual to disorient because they don't align with what is familiar, and they're like, I want to look away and I'll start forging new familiarities and I'll take a different route. So that is something which is theory. So they write that, and we use that, and we see, all right, now let's see what is happening, what is getting, is something. I want to write about this gate. Is there something which is disorienting? And that is the qualifier for this. So we are not interested in how many chajjas and how many staircases or how many domes. We are not interested in that. But the capacity of the gate to disorient. So we use the gates as we call it portals of, I forget now, portals of something. Like you enter the portal, you dissociate yourself from what is happening, and you come inside, and it becomes a totally different terrain. Because you have to imagine this Qaiser Bagh as one huge, very huge, one single entity. It was not divided into roads and this, that, and the other. So the moment you entered from the door, the portal, you were dissociated and you enter into this fantastical, over the top, celebratory place, like which was alive 24/7 all the time. So that is the way we are trying to read, and that is why it becomes a method, because there is a certain discipline we tell ourselves to read a certain thing.
One of my favorite examples from the book, because this is a queer reading also of the colonial archive. So if we take a structure like the Rumi Darwaza, for example, and then, the colonial archive is saying, yes, it is what it is, but then, what is Rumi about this? Matlab, there's no gateway like this anywhere else that, or it isn't replicating a style of architecture that, is, Turkish, for example. So, Sonal, I'll let you make the
So
argument.
the argument that we are making, and we really enjoy it, because we have been brainstorming and talking to each other, and what we talk and then we write it. So our argument is like, it may be somebody can contest it definitely, but we are saying, see, he was not interested in it being Rumi, but room means like from a queer perspective, something that is the other, the unfamiliar, and so to say the other is now part of this is what Asif was interested in. So it represents the other. It also it represents its capacity to include this style, that style, and so on. Like, that's not from here. And so he built something that was not from here, and that is why it's called Rumi Darwaza. That's our argumentation. It is not a replica, because nowhere in the, and that's also the critique of the archive, it doesn't represent anything from Constantinople or Turkey or anywhere. And actually, it's not meant to be. So that is how we are arguing. That's how it is, like the argumentation is more important than the thing itself. So that was a great example, Paul. Thanks.
So basically, Lucknow architecture is coolest. That's what we are saying, right?
Definitely.
Yeah, okay.
It's fun.
That's the takeaway. So, so yeah, we really like to love ourselves here, and we are very, very proud of what we are. So that's fantastic.
I think so underrepresented is also the case that we are making for, because you see the amount of, sort of adulation that is given to, Mughal architecture, for example, and then look at, you have to really look in the history books, especially as architectural historians, right? These examples exist, but they're not necessarily there, and they deserve to be celebrated, and not necessarily celebrated because they are symmetrical and they are proportionate and they represent some kind of ideal, but be celebrated because they are different. I think that is a key argument that the book makes, that there is something about them that is non-normative, that is different, and that's what we find very valuable.
To to highlight on the question you asked as well, that I think I'm invited generally to several institutions to give lectures on historical towns and cities. And then I'm forced to talk about Lucknow because I'm from Lucknow. And I think this book gives a lens which I have never talked about like that before. So incorporating that aspect of identity and diversity into architecture is extremely interesting. So thank you. If there's any no more questions, I think we would like to wrap up. Thanks for being a lovely audience, and thanks for really engaging with me here and with all of us. And so is there, can I say the thank you note, or will Sanatkada like to take forward from there? Yes.
Thank you everyone. Thank you Nishant, Paul and Sonal for the wonderful session. I would like to call someone from the team to just give a small, our gifting partners are India Circus, so just a small amount of token from them.
Thank you. Thank you, Sanatkada. And thank you, Nishant, for this wonderful set of questions. And thank you, audience, for having the patience and, engaging us. Thank you.